Michael Kroger, huge number of protesters Saturday against Victoria's vaccine mandate as well as this new pandemic bill. Can they just be ignored and dismissed as anti-vaxxers? To this point, so many journalists, for instance, seem to do.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? When the left protest, they're all morally right, but when people in the centre-right tend to protest, they pick out one person and say, oh, that person that had a noose was indicative of everybody. No, these are, as Peter Credlin said earlier, these are very normal people. In the main, Andrew, they're protesting against these extreme laws that Andrews is trying to bring in. This is modern fascism for those that haven't seen it. This is exactly what this is. This is what you see in those types of governments in the past. I think the other thing is, of course, some in the media, the left-wing media, want to say, oh, there weren't that many there, it was 10,000. If that's not a 50 to 60,000 crowd, I'll give up. I've seen 100,000 crowds in Melbourne, some were against the Kennett Government Industrial Relations laws. There were 50,000 people there. That is an unbelievable number for essentially a non-left process. It's the biggest non-left protest that I've ever seen in Victoria in my lifetime.
Well, in fact, looking at the size of ground they occupied, I remember when people protested against the Kennett government, a Liberal government, roughly the same sort of area, I thought the estimates there were 70,000. So there's inflation there going on. But Steve Conroy, can they just be ignored and dismissed as anti-vaxxers? That seems to have been the attitude so far, particularly by the Andrews government.
Well, firstly, I'm quite shocked to hear Michael, use some of the language he's just used. I think it is so ludicrous. I'm actually just going to keep going and pretend that he didn't try and suggest that a democratically elected government introducing legislation through a democratically elected parliament is somehow fascist.
What, to imprison people without trial, Stephen?
Absolutely.
Imprisoning people without
ludicrous.
trial.
The existing laws allow that to happen. Michael, you've whined for months that there's unelected bureaucrats like Brett Sutton in charge. So the government go, we agree. We'll change it and we'll make it elected politicians who make these decisions so that they can be held accountable. We'll stop whining about it.
It's not
You got exactly what you asked
Stephen.
For. Politicians to be accountable and in charge.
They should be making the decisions,
don't
not these decisions. Not declaring a pandemic as they have under this legislation where there is no evidence in the state of any COVID. These are extreme measures and everybody knows that. 50 or 60,000 people don't turn up, Stephen, just because they're anti-vaxxers.
My difficulty...
Very few.
The argument about some aspects of the legislation, reasonable, but it's the descriptor that this is a fascist state. I mean, Michael, I'll give you a hint. If you think this line is going to be any better than your red shirts line or your line about the CFMEU running Victoria,
red shirts.
Which is all you did for 4 years, and you've now moved. This is the good line.
Who made the decision? Who made the decision within the police not to prosecute red shirts, Stephen? What happened to the red shirts? We had the police, the detectives wanted that your colleagues, your mates arrested, and somehow someone internally in the police overruled that and your mates weren't arrested.
So, Michael...
So there should be a commission of inquiry into what went on in the Victoria Police.
If you think the fascist line is going to work, A, you do yourself a disservice, you put yourself in the Trump camp, and B, you'll lose the next election.
What is imprisoning people
move on.
Can I intervene here? Can I intervene here? The
trial.
Fascist line, look, fascists can also be elected, of course. Not all fascists are unelected, but the point for me was whether it's the chief health officer or the Premier announcing a lockdown of people with arrests of anyone who dares to defy without process of court or anything. I don't care. The fact is it's not going back to Parliament, and these things should be scrutinised and justified with a vote of Parliament, and that, I think, would ensure democracy. No. But coming back to the point...
And that's where I'm going to fundamentally... No, I'm actually going to fundamentally disagree with you.
Why's that?
I'm going to fundamentally disagree with you. A government, when a pandemic hits, has to move fast. This idea that suddenly we've moved from a cabinet Westminster government...
No. 2 weeks later.
No. Let's be very clear. Okay, you don't get 2 weeks in a pandemic.
You don't trust the Parliament to make the right choice?
give a 2-week start. No, let's be very clear. And I've had this debate over another issue identically. No, let's be very clear.
You misheard me,
the rubbish
Stephen.
that this line.
You misheard
You've
me.
adopted the Greens' position.
You misheard me.
You've adopted the Greens'
Stephen, you
position
misheard
about
me.
going to war.
You make the call, then go back to Parliament 2 weeks later, within 2 weeks, and get it approved. Now, I can't
Correct.
see why
And if you've got a majority,
Michael Kroger,
because
isn't that then? If you don't
you are
trust
running the same
Parliament,
line as the
make
Greens.
a call as a profound
You actually
as that,
have.
You are on the roots of fascism.
You have got suckered into the Greens argument, Andrew. You're arguing a Green position.
yeah.
The Green position on
I don't care.
Going to war. No, the Green position on going to war. So you have to listen to this. Is Parliament should vote on it, which means they get a say in the upper house, in the Senate.
Argument
so
by
a bunch of
analogy
lunatics,
is always very
a bunch
tricky.
of
and
unrepresentative
often dishonest.
swill.
Argument by analogy,
No.
the analogy is not perfect. Go back to the
I'll be
point.
very clear.
What is wrong with
I've always-
trusting
I'll be
Parliament to
very
legitimise it?
clear.
Give Michael Kroger a say.
Unrepresentative swill is what Paul Keating called the Senate.
The Senate.
Put my hand up. Part of the unrepresentative
Steve,
swill.
you're talking every which way except my
the
bloody
People's
question. I've asked
House.
you a direct question,
The
and now we're talking
People's
about
House.
war and the Greens and Paul Keating.
No,
Just
I'm
answer the damn
explaining to you
question.
why
Michael Kroger, you have a go.
your fundamental,
Michael Kroger,
your
you have a
fundamental
go.
attempt.
Look, Stephen, 60,000 people have objected on the weekend to these draconian laws. The Institute of Public Affairs had a full-page advertisement in the
IPA.
paper today where they've gone through what the major objections are to this legislation. That's absolutely right. Human rights bodies are complaining. Former judges are complaining. 60 leading QCs in Victoria are complaining. The opposition's obviously complaining. And all you can say is, Andrew Bolt's a greenie. Well, I always knew you were a greenie, Andrew. I always suspected that. Stephen, this is repressive legislation, whether you call it repressive or fascist or whatever. This is the type of legislation that should never appear in any Western democracy. And your mates are putting it into the Parliament because why? Because this fellow Andrews is drunk on power.
Yeah.
He's drunk on
Keep
power.
running that line,
and that's
Michael,
what's happening here.
and you get the
That's
same
what's happening
result
here.
at the next election you got at the last one.
Michael Kroger,
Focus group,
Steve
3
Conroy,
people.
Yeah, but Steve, you're just talking about political efficacy here. I'm trying to have a debate about values. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for a lively debate about this. We'll have to come back to this. Thank you very much for your time.